So in today's video, what I'm going to show is how to install a dash cam in both a Mercedes 250 CLA 2018 as well as a 2012 Mazda 3. I'm actually going to split these into two videos, but the particular dash cam that we're working with today is the MyGekoGear Orbit 950 dual dash cam. This is actually the third unit I've purchased. I've been really happy with this in my Dodge Durango, mainly because it's good value for money. Quality of the footage is amazing both during the day and at night. And the one thing I really like about this particular unit is that it comes with both the front-facing camera as well as the rear-facing camera. Install this out of the box, straight into the vehicle. It's a really straightforward installation using the cigarette lighter power adapter that comes with it. But today, what I'm going to show you is actually how to hardwire this particular unit into both vehicles using this DashCam Hardwire kit that I got from Amazon. It was about $23 Canadian, but it includes everything that you need to do a hardwire install. That way it's nice and clean, and you can free up your cigarette lighter, obviously, to charge other devices. To an in-depth review of this video is really more about how to install the unit, but just to show you what comes in the package here. So you get a quick user manual guide, the camera itself, pretty decent size on the actual screen itself. And then you'll see these are the buttons to use the camera. When you actually switch it on, there are labels here that will tell you what each of the buttons do. The camera unit itself is actually fixed, but what is adjustable is actually the lens itself. So there's a fairly decent range of motion there, and you'll see when we get it installed that you can adjust this based on the positioning on your windshield. Next thing is, of course, the rear camera. This is a tiny little unit here. Both mounts, this actually comes pre-mounted with some 3M tape. And so then this goes onto the rear glass. This is actually the mount itself that goes onto your windshield, and you'll see that there's the USB adapter as well. This is where the rear camera plugs in as well. So that this remains fixed. Camera slots into it, and then, like I say, you can adjust the lens to get the best field of view that you want. Then next up is this box here, and then what this contains is all of your hardware kit. So what I really like about this particular camera is it does actually come with a 16 gigabyte mini SD card. It's already preloaded into to the camera there, and then you also get an adapter as well. So if you want to load it into a laptop or a PC and review your footage, you can do that. This is the wiring for the rear camera, and it basically plugs in like so. And you get quite a lot of wiring here. I have a Dodge Durango that I've already installed this into, and there was more than enough wiring, and that's a fairly long vehicle. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this is actually the cigarette lighter power adapter as well, if you want to use it straight out of the box. And it does also, this video I'm going to show you how to hardwire into a vehicle. So this is a great kit that I found on Amazon.ca. Everything that you need in order to do a hardwire. So I'll just show you everything that comes in the box here. So this is actually the wiring harness itself, and depending on the type of dash cam that you have, there are a number of different adapters. So you'll see here there's actually two additional adapters that come with the unit in case it doesn't fit the size of your particular dash cam or GPS. In this case, this one actually does fit my unit. And so then you have the positive power wire as well as the ground. So I'll show you how to ground that. You get a bunch of little clips here to help guide some of the cabling. And then this is what's also really neat, is they give you a bunch of different options depending on which fuse you choose and the size of the fuse as well. So we've got essentially, it looks like 5 different fuse adapters that we can plug the positive into, and we'll talk more about that when we actually go to install in the vehicle. And then lastly, they also give you some, I believe they're 5 amp fuses, again depending on the installation and the type of fuse that you're going to do. The other thing I thought was interesting is they have a little coupon here. If you leave them a positive review, they'll give you a $5 Amazon gift card. So we'll see how this all works out, and maybe we'll do that. Okay, so here we are inside the CLA. So this is an install on a 2018 Mercedes CLA 250. This is obviously a North American car, which is why I'm sitting in the passenger side on the right-hand side. But the install would be exactly the same if you were doing it in a European vehicle, just of course the other way around. One thing to note with the CLA is that the fuse box itself is actually located behind the footwell here, behind the carpeting. So what we're going to need to do is essentially, I'm going to suggest actually mounting the camera on the passenger side, so it's not too distracting for the driver. We're actually going to feed the cables all the way up here through the headliner, and then we'll take it down the A pillar. We'll bring the cabling for the power. That'll actually go down, and I'll show you how to route that into the fuse box. And then for the rear camera, what we'll actually do is we'll actually take it across the top here, and we'll work our way all the way to the back of the vehicle. And again, we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Okay, so before we think about where we're going to mount the camera itself, one of the things I would suggest doing is actually just using the cigarette lighter power adapter and plugging it in, just so that we can start looking and seeing what the positioning looks like in the vehicle. Originally, I was thinking it'd be really nice to have it kind of down here in the center. This is my wife's car, and I know she's going to complain about that, it's just too much distraction, I think, on the windshield. So what I was actually thinking of doing is actually mounting it up here, so it's actually essentially behind the rear view mirror. It won't be distracting to anyone driving the vehicle. And the other thing that we sort of have to overcome is there's a fairly big block here as well, so how we're going to be able to hide that and keep that discreet. So by mounting it further up here will allow us to hide this essentially under the headliner. So you've got two things that are going into the mount. One is the rear view camera, and then the other one is the power adapter. Now when you hardwire, use the hardwiring kit, same issue that you're dealing with as well. You've got this plastic block here as well. So either way, I'm thinking we're going to mount it up here, and that's going to, again, there's lots of adjustment that can be done with the camera there as well, depending on how we end up with the final install. So you don't want to put it too far up towards the headliner, because you do need some space here for these two plugs. And I would recommend making those plugs accessible in case you ever need to unplug them. Although when the unit is actually installed, you can just pull it out like this. And that's what I do if I want to take the camera out and actually review the footage. It's just easier to do that and try and faff around with trying to get the SD card out in the vehicle. So before we commit to the install, probably just want to give a bit of a clean to the windshield here. Make sure it's all clear of any crap, and then we'll go ahead and stick the actual mount up there. Okay, so before we actually commit, I've cleaned off there, and again, just want to check where we want our camera to be. So I'm thinking something like this is probably going to work well. So just remove the 3M tape. And then just give it a good push. Okay, and that should hold there. So again, we can adjust the camera later on once we've completed the installation, but you can see there's a fairly decent range of motion there, both to the left, to the right, up and down. Okay, so next thing we want to do is, of course, unplug the cigarette adapter power cable, and of course replace that. Already getting messed up with wires here, but replace that with the actual power adapter that comes with the hardwiring kit. Okay, so what we're going to want to do now is just use a couple of cable ties just to keep this cabling a little tidy. Okay, so I've trimmed off, don't want to put too many cable ties on there. So the next thing is, just want to start trying to get this under the headliner, and it'll go in fairly quickly and easily. We'll just feed both cables over. Just push that all the way back there. So you can see that's nice and tidy. Then what we're going to do is come in around here, and then I don't think I'm going to need to remove this panel here. I think I can run the cables down. I'll remove obviously the trim piece here, or the rubber gasket. So we just pull down all the way here. Don't need to go too far. And then that should help us get this cabling in here. So we've got it tucked in here, and then what we'll then need to do is of course separate this one wire. We'll just temporarily feed that down here for now. So it's going to go for the power, and then the rear camera, basically you can just feed it in through the headliner now that we've taken the rubber off, and then just use your plastic trim tool as well, just to feed it around where you need it. So we'll keep going with the installation there, but since we now have this done, we can push the rubber trim back, feed the wire down to there. To get this piece off, apparently it's fairly straightforward. Again, just use a panel removing tool. And then this will give us access to be able to bring down, of course I've done this the wrong way, that's the rear camera. Dang it. So we've got our power cables that we're going to feed down into the fuse box. So just tuck those all down. And then we'll use one of these bolts here for a ground. Once we get the fuse box open, I'll show you how we're going to do that in a second here. But what we'll continue to do is just feed the rear camera wiring You can tell this is a well-built German car. Unlike my Durango. So you can see you've got lots of cable here. I mean, this is a fairly small sedan, but if you had a longer vehicle, lots of cable to work with here. In fact, what I'm thinking is there's quite a bit of space behind here. So what I'm thinking I'm going to do is bunch up the excess cable and actually pack that in behind this particular area here. Because like you can see there's quite a lot of extra cable left, so we can hopefully discreetly stuff that in there. So what I've done here is just use some cable tie. That's quite a bit of excess there, and then the remaining cable we got enough to bring it to the, actually that's more than enough there, so I'm just gonna, I think, just stuff the rest of this somehow down here, just to hopefully keep it out of the way. So now we've got the rear camera. I've cleaned off, hopefully you can see this okay, but I've essentially cleaned off the rear window, and this one we want to have center mounted. Just like that, looks good. And then we'll connect these two cables up. And same thing again, we're just gonna run this under the headliner. Don't pull too hard on the headliner because you don't want to damage it. But there should be enough play in it to just tuck all of this cable in. Keep it nice and clean. And then we'll be able to adjust this camera then, depending on how we want to set it up. So the next thing we want to do is get into access the fuse box, which is done by just pulling back on the seating here, and then there's a little push, and then that should get us access then to the fuse box. So the thing we need to contend with is just running this cable, which will go right in this way here. So we're going to need to find somewhere to ground. Okay, there's a grounding section there, so I'm thinking we'll just ground it. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of ground wires there. So we'll ground it. And then the next thing we need to do is actually figure out which fuse we're going to use. Now, this kit does come with a system where it will switch off the unit if you have it parked, but it remains on with the power. I'm a little reluctant to do that. I'm actually just going to plug this in so that the power is on when the ignition is on. I think that's probably the easiest thing. So we just need to figure out which of these fuses we're going to use for that. So we're going to get the multimeter out and start testing. Before we do all of that, now that we've obviously got this all wired in, we can go ahead and push this panel back in. That's fairly straightforward there. Okay, so we've got our multimeter. Just going to ground it here. And just looking to see. So I don't know whether you can see this here, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th from the left here. This appears to be a fuse that is always on. So if you are looking to wire it where there's constant power, you could probably go with that one. What I'm going to try and do is find one. These are all constant power. This one doesn't appear to be. Maybe see what this one is here. This is an empty space. So I may go with this one here depending on what happens when I switch the electricity, the ignition on to the vehicle. Because these ones are all hot even though there's no power to the vehicle. You just have to kind of play around and see what works. So I don't know whether you can see here, but I've gone for this particular fuse here. It's number 71. It's open. It was showing as active when the ignition is switched on. There's no existing fuse there, but if there was, you would put that fuse in here, and then this is your 5 amp that comes with the kit itself. So I'm gonna push this guy in there, and then that's going to get us some power. So we'll plug these two together, and then for your ground you need a 10mm socket. We'll just loosen that off. Okay, so after a bit of playing around here, I actually discovered it's the second fuse from the left. There's already a 5 amp fuse in there. You actually need to have 2 fuses in order to make this work. The second fuse in from the left here on kind of the maroon or purple is the glove box light. So that's a perfect one. You'll see that I eventually got the ground in there as well. So what you'll see now is that when we go to switch on our ignition, then we're now getting power to the unit, and you'll see that also the light is on for the glove box. So we're all good to go there, and you'll see it's actually charging the unit as well. And when we switch off, so that's the end, that'll be the engine running, and then when we switch everything off, it will eventually power down. So I've just gone ahead and used some cable ties just to tidy up all the cables there, and just also run the cable here so it's kind of out of the way. Stuff that down there, close up the fuse box, and then that all goes back, and we're pretty much done. So now I'm in the driver's seat, and I just wanted to show you essentially how this looks now the mirror's in place here. You can see, you actually can't, as the driver, actually see the camera at all, which is sort of how I wanted it for my wife's car. if I move it by here, one of the last things you want to do is just remove the plastic screen. And again, we'll switch on the ignition. You see we've got red power coming on. And now the unit's starting to power up. So the only thing that we'll need to do, sorry, one other thing is there is a clear plastic protector on the rear camera, so you want to pull that off as well. And then the last thing you want to do is just make sure that the footage out of the rear camera that there's no adjustments needed for that camera. So what we'll need to do in order to do that is just play around with taking some footage and then just adjust the camera accordingly, and we'll do the same with the front as well. But overall, really happy with how this is installed. It's a German car, so it's a little bit better made than North American cars, so some of the panels were a little harder to pull off, but I think you'll agree that it's actually really nice and tidily installed here. And you'll see the rear camera there. It's pretty pretty discreet, and again, the way I've installed it shouldn't be distracting to the driver. You can actually do a screensaver setting on here so that actually the screen goes black. So if you don't want to be distracted by that, but I actually prefer to keep this on. So the last thing I'm going to do, and I'm not going to show this in the video, is I'm going to just configure the camera to make sure that it's ready and set up for how I want it. There are a bunch of warnings that you can use on this camera. So there are a bunch of settings that you can do on the camera. There is a collision avoidance setting as well as lane departure. To be honest, they're not that great. I would recommend switching them off. My wife drove our Dodge Durango when I had them initially set on, and it drove her crazy. So you can switch all of those alerts off. The main thing is that obviously you've got the camera up and running. It continually loops, so you can choose whether you want a 1-minute loop, I think a 3-minute loop, or maybe a 5-minute loop. I have mine set to a 1-minute loop. Right now, that essentially gets me on a 16 gigabyte card. With both the rear and front cameras, that gets me about an hour's worth of footage. There is the ability to, if you're in an emergency, to lock a particular item. You can see a padlock sign here. I don't know whether you can see that, but by pushing that, that will lock that clip, and so it won't loop and re-record over it. But there's a ton of features on here. Again, this isn't about that. It's more just about how to install it in the Mercedes 250 CLA. So I hope you found this useful. And yeah, install itself, I would say, not shooting a video, you're probably looking at about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on your level of expertise.